The sound of the judge's gavel striking the dark, polished wood didn't just echo through the cavernous courtroom. It reverberated deep inside my bones, a physical tremor that felt like the summation of every silent, weary year I'd carried. For a moment, the sharp crack was the only thing I could hear, the only thing I could feel. It was the sound of my life, of the last 13 years, being called into question. Here I was, Eleanor Vance, 67 years old, sitting in this chamber that smelled of old wood, lemon polish, and quiet desperation. Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. My wrinkled hands, clutching a simple yellow envelope as if it were the last solid thing on earth. My heart was a frantic, frightened bird beating against the cage of my ribs, so loud and panicked I was certain everyone in the room could hear it, the stenographer, with her poised fingers, the bored-looking clerk, the strangers in the gallery, leaning forward, hungry for drama. Across from me, at the other table, sat my daughter, my own flesh and blood, Valerie. She was 39 now, no longer the lost, frantic girl I remembered. She was polished, dressed in an elegant, severe suit the color of charcoal, her hair styled into a sharp bob that spoke of money and intention. Beside her, her lawyer, a man named Mark Sullivan with a red tie as bold as his confidence, pointed a finger in my direction. The gesture was subtle, but its meaning was as clear as if he'd shouted it, "Criminal." That's what they were painting me as. But it was Valerie's eyes that held me, that threatened to unravel the careful composure I'd wrapped around myself like a shield. They burned with a rage I couldn't fathom, a pure, undiluted fury that seemed to suck all the air from the space between us. Or perhaps I understood it all too well. Perhaps that was the true source of the ache spreading through my chest. "Your Honor," Valerie's voice cut through the static in my mind, trembling slightly but underpinned by a terrifying firmness. She was standing now, addressing Judge Theodore Mason, a man with a kind face, weathered by a lifetime of listening to other people's tragedies. "My mother has had my children for 13 years without my consent. This constitutes parental kidnapping. I never authorized her to take them." The word, kidnapping. It landed like a physical blow, a sharp dagger that pierced straight through my sternum and lodged itself deep in the place where I kept all my motherly pains, all the sleepless nights and whispered worries. I felt the air leave my lungs. How could a word so monstrous be applied to a love so absolute? I had to consciously remind myself to breathe, to focus on the weight of the envelope in my hands, its contents a silent testament to the real story. I allowed my gaze to drift away from my daughter's accusatory stare, back to the third row of the public gallery. And there they were. My reasons for everything, my heart. Arthur, 20 years old now, a man really, with a thoughtful brow and a quiet strength that had seen us through so much. Emily, 18, my sensitive poet, her eyes wide and glassy with unshed tears. And Andrea, just 16, my fiery, determined girl, hugging herself as if she were still that scared 3-year-old. Their faces were pale, etched with a confusion so profound it broke my heart all over again. They looked like they were watching a play in a foreign language, understanding the emotions but none of the meaning. Judge Mason observed me over the rim of his glasses, his tired eyes seeming to take in every detail: my simple, worn dress, my hands clenched tight, the fear I was trying so hard to mask. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice a low, resonant baritone that commanded silence. "What do you have to say to these accusations?" My fingers tightened around the envelope. Inside was more than paper. It was the proof of a truth I had held close for over a decade, protecting it like a sacred treasure, or perhaps like a wound that had never been allowed to fully heal. It was my shield, my sword, my burden. I cleared my throat, willing my voice not to betray the storm of emotion inside me. "Your Honor," I began, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. "I didn't kidnap anyone. I simply raised the children my daughter abandoned on my doorstep. That's a lie. Valerie shot to her feet, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. The sound was like a scream in the hushed room. I never abandoned them. I had mental health issues. I needed temporary help. Her lawyer, Mark Sullivan, placed a calming hand on her arm, a practiced gesture of control. Your Honor, if I may, he interjected, his voice smooth and patronizing. My client was hospitalized for severe postpartum depression. She needed urgent medical treatment. Mrs. Vance, he said, gesturing toward me, took advantage of that profound vulnerability to keep the children and systematically alienate them from their biological mother. A wave of whispers rippled through the courtroom. I saw heads nodding in the gallery, saw people looking at me with newfound suspicion. They were building a narrative, a story of a manipulative grandmother who had stolen a vulnerable woman's children, and the audience was already buying it. They saw a well-dressed, articulate woman and her sharp lawyer, and they saw an elderly woman in simple clothes. They thought they knew who the victim was, but they didn't know the truth. They hadn't lived it. They hadn't been there for the early mornings, the fevers in the dead of night, the struggles with homework, the tearful hugs when a small voice would ask, "Grandma, when is Mommy coming back?" They didn't know the weight of it all. Mrs. Vance, the judge said, and his tone was noticeably softer when he addressed me. I understand that caring for your grandchildren for so long must have been an immense difficulty, but if the biological mother is now stable and requesting custody, we must consider the legal and moral precedent. With all due respect, Your Honor, I interrupted, my voice coming out stronger and clearer than I ever expected it could. It surprised me as much as it seemed to surprise everyone else. There are things this court needs to know before any decision can be made, crucial things. And with that, I raised the yellow envelope. It was a simple, almost pathetic gesture, a worn manila packet held aloft by trembling, aged hands, but its effect was immediate and electric. I saw Valerie's eyes widen, the rage in them flickering and being replaced by something else. Something that looked an awful lot like raw, unadulterated fear. Her lawyer's confident posture stiffened ever so slightly. Judge Mason leaned forward, his interest visibly piqued. What kind of documents, Mrs. Vance? Proof, I said, my voice gaining strength from the solid truth I held. Proof of what really happened 13 years ago. Proof of why my daughter is here today. And it's not. I paused, letting my gaze sweep over Valerie before returning to the judge. It's not from a place of maternal love. My voice trembled then, not from fear, but from a deep, churning emotion. I couldn't quite name a mixture of a lifetime of love, 13 years of sacrifice, and the profound sorrow of this moment. From across the room, I heard Valerie's whisper, a desperate, choked plea. Mom, please, don't do this. I turned to look at her directly. Do what, daughter? I asked, my voice dropping to a near whisper that still carried in the silent room. Tell the truth? Attorney Sullivan cleared his throat, a sharp, dismissive sound. Your Honor, Mrs. Vance is clearly attempting to divert attention from the central issue here. Documents from the distant past do not change the fundamental fact that my client has legal rights as the biological mother. On the contrary, I said, my eyes still locked with Valerie's. I could see the ghost of the little girl she used to be, the one I'd caught in a mischief, staring back at me from a woman's face. These documents explain exactly why we are here today. They explain why, after 13 years of absolute silence, of not sending a single dollar for her children's food or clothes or school supplies, of not even making a phone call on Christmas morning, my daughter suddenly appears now, not with open arms, but with a lawyer. The silence that descended upon the room was heavy, thick, and palpable, like the charged air right before a thunderstorm breaks. In that profound quiet, I could hear everything with unnatural clarity. The frantic pounding of my own heart, the soft rustle of papers as the lawyer nervously shuffled through his notes, the ragged, Anxious breathing of my grandchildren sitting behind me. Judge Mason looked at me with an intensity I hadn't seen before. Mrs. Vance, are you suggesting there are hidden motives behind this lawsuit? I'm not suggesting anything, Your Honor, I replied, my voice steady and clear. I am stating it as a fact, and it's all documented here. I tapped the envelope for emphasis. Mom, Valerie whispered again, her voice breaking. Please think about what you're doing. I've had 13 years to think, Valerie, I replied, and the words felt like stones I was dropping one by one into the still pool of the courtroom. 13 years of sleepless nights when Arthur had a fever that wouldn't break. 13 years of parent-teacher conferences where I was the only family member in the room. 13 years of waiting for a call from you, a letter, a sign, that never came. Judge Mason tapped his gavel gently, a soft tap 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 that brought a formal order back to the proceedings. Mrs. Vance, are you willing to present these documents as evidence in this case? I looked down at the envelope in my hands. It felt both impossibly heavy and frighteningly fragile. Inside were the letters Valerie had sent me in those first few months, the photos I'd taken to document the truth, every receipt I'd scrupulously saved, and something else. Something I had kept even from my grandchildren. The final piece, the one thing I knew would change everything, forever. I took a deep, steadying breath, drawing on a well of strength I hadn't known I still possessed. Yes, Your Honor, I said, my voice firm and resolute. I am ready. The judge nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. He paused to glance at his agenda, then back at me. Very well, Mrs. Vance. But before we examine these documents, I would like to hear your full account of the facts. In your own words, tell this court what happened 13 years ago. A part of me wanted to shrink from the task, to hide from the pain of reliving that day. But another part, the part that had fought and scraped and loved for 13 long years, stood its ground. I closed my eyes for a single moment, allowing myself to be transported back. The cold, sterile air of the courtroom faded away, replaced by the memory of dampness and the scent of chamomile tea. I was going back to the day that changed my life forever, the rainy Tuesday in October, when my daughter walked out of my life and left me with the 3 most precious, broken responsibilities I would ever know. And so, I began. It was a Tuesday, I started, my voice softening, taking on the faraway quality of memory. A cold, rainy Tuesday in October. I remember the light that day was a flat gray thing, and the rain tapped a steady, mournful rhythm against my kitchen window. I could feel the eyes of the entire room on me. But I focused on the judge, on telling the story as clearly and truthfully as I could. I had just come back from a doctor's appointment, I continued. My arthritis had been confirmed to be worsening. It was news I'd now expected, but hearing it said aloud still felt like a sentence. I was in my small kitchen, the one with the yellow countertops and the always dripping faucet, preparing a cup of chamomile tea to calm my nerves. The kettle had just begun to whistle when I heard the knocks on the door. It was near noon. I could see it all so clearly, as if it were happening right in front of me instead of in the distant past. The knocking wasn't normal, it was frantic, urgent. It set my heart racing even then. I remember wiping my hands on my apron, feeling a sense of dread I couldn't explain. I walked to the door and opened it. I looked over at my grandchildren. Arthur gave me a sad, knowing smile, as if he too were remembering fragments of that chaotic day. Emily's eyes were glistening with tears she was too proud to shed, and Andrea, my baby, had her arms wrapped tightly around her middle, just as she used to do when she was a scared little girl seeking comfort. And there she was, I said, my gaze shifting to Valerie. Valerie, standing on my doorstep, soaked from the rain, with her 3 children huddled around her. Arthur was 7, so tall and thin for his age. Emily was 5, her little face pale and serious. And Andrea was barely 3, just a tiny thing, really. My voice caught as I described them. They were dirty, Their clothes were wrinkled and stained, too thin for the weather. The littlest ones were crying, not loud, dramatic sobs, but a soft, hopeless whimpering that spoke of pure hunger and exhaustion. Valerie had lowered her gaze to the table in front of her, refusing to meet my eyes. Her lawyer was whispering something urgent in her ear, but she gave no indication that she heard him. I knew she remembered that day. I knew she remembered it as clearly as I did. My daughter entered my house like a hurricane. I went on, the memory sharp and vivid. She was carrying a single plastic grocery bag, bulging, with what I later discovered was a jumble of the children's clothes, nothing clean, nothing folded, just thrown together. She thrust it into my hands and said, "Mom, I need you to keep them for a while. It will only be a few weeks. Just until I sort out my problems." I let the words hang in the air, allowing the court to absorb the image. I asked her, "What problems, Valerie? Do you need financial help? Has something happened with the children's father?" But she wouldn't answer. She just kept repeating the same thing. Like a mantra, "It'll just be a few weeks. I'll be back soon." She gave each of the children a quick, almost perfunctory kiss on the top of their heads, and then she turned and she walked back out the door. The memory was so potent I could almost feel the chill of the October air sweeping into my warm kitchen. The children, they ran to the front window, their little hands pressed against the glass. They were shouting, "Mommy, Mommy, don't go." But she was already climbing into a taxi that was waiting at the curb. She didn't look back. She just got in, and the car pulled away, disappearing into the gray sheets of rain. The silence in the room was absolute now. I could feel the people around me holding their breath, caught in the story. I could feel their sympathy shifting, tilting toward me. That night, I continued, my voice growing thick with emotion. Arthur asked me when his mom was coming back. I told him, "Soon, baby. Soon." Andrea cried herself to sleep because she wanted her teddy bear, the one that had been left behind at Valerie's apartment. And Emily, my sweet, serious Emily, she helped me prepare dinner with her little hands. She stood on a chair next to me at the counter, quietly tearing lettuce for a salad, as if she somehow understood, even at 5 years old, that the weight of the world had just settled onto my shoulders, and it was now my responsibility, and mine, alone, to keep everyone together. My voice broke then, a small crack that let a sliver of my profound weariness show through. I paused, reaching for the glass of water the court officer had placed before me. I took a slow sip, the cool liquid a blessing on my dry throat. I needed a moment. I needed to gather myself for the rest of the story, for the long, hard years that were to come. The courtroom waited, suspended in the tail of that rainy Tuesday, and I knew there was no turning back. The truth was beginning its long, slow walk out of the shadows, and I was the only one who could lead it into the light. The gasp that rippled through the courtroom when I spoke those words, voluntary renunciation of parental rights, was like a physical force. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated shock, the collective intake of breath from a roomful of people who thought they had heard the full extent of the story. Judge Mason remained standing, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the bench, his eyes wide with disbelief. For a long moment, no one moved, no one spoke. The only sound was Valerie's ragged, hysterical sobbing as she collapsed forward onto the table, her body racked with tremors that looked like they might break her in two. A voluntary renunciation of parental rights. The judge repeated, his voice hushed, as if saying it too loudly might make it more real, more devastating. "Mrs. Vance, are you absolutely sure about what you are saying?" "Completely sure, Your Honor," I said, my voice steady, though my own heart was thundering. This was the moment I had both dreaded and, in a strange way, hoped for, the moment the final, unassailable truth would be laid bare. This paper was among the things Valerie left behind in her apartment. The landlady, Mrs. Paula Sterling, gave it to me along with photographs and other personal documents my daughter had abandoned. I extended the document toward the court clerk. The young woman approached me almost reverently, her eyes wide, and took the single, fateful sheet of paper. She carried it carefully, as if it were a live explosive, and placed it before Judge Mason. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So, if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Valerie stumbled up from her chair, swaying on her feet. I was crazy. She shrieked, her voice tearing through the tense silence. I didn't know what I was writing. I was mentally ill. You can't hold me to that. Her lawyer, Mark Sullivan, his face a grim mask of professional ruin, took the document from the judge with trembling hands. As his eyes scanned the words, his face lost all remaining color. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire case, his entire strategy, vanish into smoke. This can't be real, he murmured, more to himself than to the court. Read it aloud, please, counselor. Judge Mason ordered, his voice grave and imposing. He had retaken his seat, but he sat ramrod straight, his full, formidable attention fixed on the paper. Attorney Sullivan cleared his throat, the sound rough and uncomfortable. He began to read in a choked, halting voice that was a far cry from the smooth confidence he had displayed just an hour before. It says, I, Valerie Vance, 26 years of age, hereby voluntarily relinquish all my rights as mother of Arthur Vance, 7 years old, Emily Vance, 5 years old, and Andrea Vance, 3 years old. I acknowledge that I do not have the emotional, economic, or psychological capacity to raise them adequately. The silence in the room was so profound, so heavy. You could hear the agitated breathing of every single person present. I dared a glance back at my grandchildren. They were holding on to each other, their faces etched with a fresh wave of confusion and pain. This was the ultimate betrayal, spelled out in their mother's own handwriting. Arthur's jaw was clenched so tight I feared he might crack a tooth. Emily was weeping silently, and Andrea looked lost, as if the ground beneath her had just vanished. Continue, the judge commanded, his voice like granite. The lawyer swallowed hard. I fully authorize my mother, Eleanor Vance, to make all legal, medical, and educational decisions related to my children. I waive any right to visit them, contact them, or claim them in the future. This decision is definitive and irrevocable. Signed, Valerie Vance. Dated October 15, 2011. Valerie broke into hysterical, uncontrollable sobs. I was sick. I didn't know what I was doing. Judge Mason rapped his gavel sharply. Crack, crack, crack. Order. I will have order in this court. He waited for the murmurs to die down before turning his piercing gaze to me. Mrs. Vance, do you have witnesses that can attest to the fact that this document was written voluntarily by your daughter? Yes, Your Honor, I replied, prepared for this question. The landlady of the building where Valerie lived, Mrs. Paula Sterling, can testify that my daughter specifically asked her for paper and a pen to write an important letter 3 days after she left the children with me. Mrs. Sterling can also confirm that Valerie was conscious, coherent, and showed no signs of mental incapacity during those days. She was, in her own words, determined. Attorney Sullivan was now whispering urgently, frantically, into Valerie's ear, but she was beyond listening, lost in a storm of her own making. Furthermore, I continued, my voice cutting through her sobs, there's something else the court should know. Something I discovered only 2 weeks ago, which explains the precise, calculated timing of my daughter's return. All eyes were fixed on me once more. I could feel the tension in the room intensify, coiling like a spring. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small, neat folder, the result of the private investigator's work. Your Honor, I began, opening the folder. I hired the investigator not only to learn about my daughter's recent movements, but to fully understand the motivation behind them. What we discovered is revealing. I let my eyes sweep over Valerie, who had lifted her head, her face a mess of tears and smeared makeup. Valerie and her partner, Javier Dawson, are facing a severe, and I would say desperate, financial crisis. The report shows that 6 months ago, Javier lost his job. 4 months ago, they received an eviction notice from their home. And 3 months ago, exactly when they learned the details of my brother's inheritance, they began the legal procedures to obtain custody of my grandchildren. Valerie lifted her head, her eyes red and pleading. "Mom, please, let me finish, daughter," I said, my voice firm but not cruel. After so many years, I felt I had earned the right to this brutal honesty. "The investigator also discovered that you and Javier have been living on high-interest loans and maxed-out credit cards. You owe more than $30,000 in accumulated, unsecured debt." The judge took the documents I provided, his eyes scanning the financial records. "And you believe," he said, looking up at me, "that your grandchildren's inheritance is the solution they are seeking for their financial problems?" "I don't believe it, Your Honor," I stated, looking directly at Valerie. "I know it. Because a week ago, my daughter called me on the phone for the first time in 13 years. The surprise in the room was palpable. A fresh wave of whispers erupted. Even my grandchildren looked at me in astonishment. I had protected them from this, too. "And what did she say in that call?" the judge asked, leaning forward. "She told me she had matured," I recounted, the memory of that conversation still fresh and painful, that she had overcome her problems and that she wanted to get her children back. When I asked her why now, after so long, she said she had been saving money to offer them a better life. I paused, letting the court absorb the lie. Then, I asked her about my brother's inheritance. I looked directly at Valerie. She knew what was coming. She covered her face with her hands again, as if she could hide from her own words. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I continued, my voice dropping. "And then she said, 'Mom, that money belongs to my children. I just want to make sure they receive it when the time is right.'" "And what did you reply?" the judge prompted. I told her that her children already had access to that inheritance through me, their legal guardian. I told her the money was safe in a trust fund until each of them turned 21. I took a sharp breath. It was then that her tone changed completely. The pretense of maternal concern vanished. I could feel the entire courtroom leaning in. She told me that as their biological mother, she had more right to manage that inheritance than I did. She told me she had consulted with a lawyer and that she could legally fight for custody. And then, she threatened me, Your Honor. The judge's eyes narrowed. "How did she threaten you?" "She told me that if I didn't voluntarily transfer custody and control of the inheritance to her, she would accuse me of kidnapping. She said she had witnesses who could testify that I had intentionally alienated the children from her. She told me, and I remember her exact words. She said, 'A judge will always favor a biological mother over a grandmother.'" Arthur shot up from his seat, his face a mask of fury and hurt. "Grandma, why didn't you tell us she threatened you?" I turned to him, my expression softening for a moment. "Because I didn't want you to worry more than you already were, my love," I replied gently. "And because I truly believed, that the truth would come out at the right time." "Young man, please take your seat," the judge ordered, though his tone was not unkind. He then returned his stern gaze to me. "Mrs. Vance, do you have that phone conversation recorded?" "No, Your Honor," I said. "But I have something better." A slight, sad smile touched my lips. After that call, my daughter sent me several text messages where she repeated her threats. Messages that are saved on my phone and that I have printed for the court. I pulled out the final sheets of paper from my folder, the printouts of the text messages, a modern-day testament to an ancient greed. I handed them to the clerk, who passed them to the judge. He read them in silence, his expression growing more severe, more grim with each message he consumed. "Can you read some of these messages to the court, Mrs. Vance?" he asked, his voice low. I took the printouts back. My hands were steady. The final veil was about to be torn away. Message from July 18th. I read, my voice clear and unwavering in the hushed room. Mom, think it over carefully. I'm the biological mother and any judge will side with me. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. I let the words hang there for a moment before continuing. Message from July 20th. I read, I've been talking to my lawyer. He says what you did could be considered parental kidnapping. You could go to jail. I took a breath, steeling myself for the last one, the most damning one. And the last message, I said, my voice growing even firmer, colder. From July 22nd. Mom, if you give me custody voluntarily, we can reach an agreement on the inheritance. 50/50. You keep half for having taken care of them. I keep half because I'm their mother. But if you force me to go to trial, I get everything. I placed the printouts down on the witness stand. The silence that followed was the most profound yet. It was the silence of a case shattering into a million irreparable pieces. The judge placed the documents carefully on his desk and looked directly at Valerie. Mrs. Vance, he said, his voice like ice, do you confirm that you sent these messages? Valerie could only sob, her body convulsing, unable to form a single, coherent word. Her lawyer looked utterly defeated, a man who knew the battle was lost and the war was over. Your Honor, I said, my voice softening now, the fight draining out of me, leaving only a deep, profound sorrow in its wake. I want to make one thing very clear. I am not seeking revenge against my daughter. I understand that she went through difficult times when she was young. I understand that early motherhood, financial strain, and mental health problems can lead people to make desperate, terrible decisions. I looked at Valerie, and I felt a complicated, painful mix of pity and disappointment. But what I cannot accept, what I will never accept, is that after 13 years of total absence, after having formally, in her own hand, relinquished her rights as a mother, after having formed a new family and forgotten these children entirely, she now returns only because money is involved. She threatened to have me, the only constant in these children's lives, thrown in jail, all for a share of an inheritance she did nothing to earn and has no right to claim. Judge Mason nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. What is it you are requesting from the court, Mrs. Vance? I stood tall, drawing on the last reserves of my strength. This was it, the culmination of everything. I request that my permanent legal guardianship over my minor grandchildren, Emily and Andrea, be formally and irrevocably confirmed. I request that my daughter's custody demand be completely and permanently rejected. And I request that a restraining order be issued, preventing Valerie from approaching the children or me for a significant period of time, unless they, when they are of legal age, voluntarily, and of their own free will, decide to have contact with her. Valerie screamed from her seat, a raw, primal sound of loss. You can't take my children away from me forever. I turned to her, and for the first time, I let her see the full, unvarnished truth of my resolve. Daughter, I said, my voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. You yourself gave them up 13 years ago. I am not taking anything from you. I am simply, and finally, protecting what you so willingly abandoned. The judge declared a 30-minute recess to review all the documentation presented. The sound of his gavel was like a period at the end of a long, painful sentence. The courtroom erupted into a buzz of conversation as people began to file out, but I remained seated in my place, my purse held tight against my chest like a protective shield. I felt drained, hollowed out, but also clean, as if a festering wound had finally been lanced. My grandchildren approached me, surrounding me with their arms, their bodies forming a silent, loving barricade against the world. It was a hug that spoke more than 1,000 words ever could. Grandma, Andrea whispered into my shoulder, her voice muffled by my dress. Why did you never tell us? Why didn't you tell us she had given us up in writing? I stroked her hair, so like her mother's in texture, but so different in the spirit it contained. Because, my love, I said softly, I wanted you to have the chance to form your own opinion about your mother when you were old enough to understand the complexities of life. I didn't want you to grow up with that knowledge, with that specific kind of hatred in your hearts. It was a heavy burden, and I chose to carry it for you. Arthur squeezed my hand, his grip strong and sure. But you lied to us all these years, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You always told us that maybe she would come back one day. You gave us hope. I looked into his eyes, the eyes of the man he had become, and saw the little boy he had been. I didn't lie, Arthur. I held on to a hope, a mother's foolish hope, that she would mature, that she would return for the right reasons for you, for your sisters, for love. I held on to that hope for a long, long time. I glanced over to where Valerie was sitting, her head in her hands, her lawyer talking to her in low, desperate whispers. But when she called me a week ago, I knew. I knew immediately that she hadn't returned for you. She had returned for the money. And that is a hope no one should ever have to cling to. Emily sat down beside me, leaning her head on my shoulder. What's going to happen now, Grandma? She asked, her voice small and tired. I don't know, my child, I replied honestly, wrapping my arm around her. But I know we have told the truth. The whole unvarnished truth. And in the end, that is all we can ever do. The rest is in the hands of the judge and in the hands of fate. During the recess, I watched as Valerie, slowly and hesitantly, disentangled herself from her lawyer and began to walk toward us. Her steps were unsure, as if each one was a mountain she had to climb. Her lawyer tried to stop her, to pull her back, but she shook him off with a sudden, sharp movement. She stopped a few feet away from our little huddle, her eyes red-rimmed and desperate. Mom, she said, her voice broken and small. Can we talk, privately? Just for a moment? I looked at my grandchildren. They looked back at me, their expressions a mixture of anger, curiosity, and fear. I gave them a small, reassuring nod. I'll be right back, I told them. I stood up and followed Valerie to a relatively quiet corner of the hallway, away from the main flow of foot traffic. She leaned against the cold marble wall as if she needed its support to remain upright. I know I made terrible mistakes, she began, her voice trembling just like it had when she was a child and had been caught in a misdeed. Horrible mistakes. But I've changed, Mom. I've really changed. I looked at her, at the elegant suit that couldn't hide her trembling hands, at the styled hair that framed a face ravaged by tears and regret. Have you changed, Valerie? I asked, my question direct, but not cruel. After today, I felt I had earned the right to this honesty. Or do you just need the money? She lowered her gaze, unable to meet my eyes. Both, she whispered, the word a confession. Both are true. Yes, I need the money, we're drowning, but I've also missed my children. All these years I've missed them. You've missed them, I asked, and I couldn't keep the slight rise of disbelief out of my voice. Valerie, you had 13 years to miss them. 13 years to pick up a phone, to write a letter, to send a postcard at Christmas. 13 years to ask how they were doing, if they needed anything, if they even remembered you. That's 4,745 days of missing them. Where was that missing for all that time? I was scared, she whispered, her voice cracking. I was scared they would hate me for abandoning them. Then why now? I pressed, my voice low and intense. Why, after 13 years of being too scared, do you suddenly find the courage to fight for them in a court of law? What changed? Valerie leaned her head back against the wall, staring up at the fluorescent lights in the ceiling. The fight seemed to go out of her, replaced by a weary, devastating honesty. Because Javier told me that if I didn't try to get my children and their inheritance back, he would leave me. He said he couldn't stay with a woman who had just given away $50,000. Her brutal confession caught me off guard. For a single, fleeting moment, I didn't see the calculating woman who had threatened me. I saw the scared, lost girl she had once been, trapped between impossible choices, seeking approval from a man who saw her children as a financial burden. "Then you haven't changed at all," I said, my voice filled with a deep, profound sadness. 13 years ago, you made a decision based on what a man demanded of you. You chose him over your children. And today, you are here in this courtroom, fighting to upend our lives, for the exact same reason. It's not that simple. Her voice rose, but she immediately looked around to see if anyone had heard. "Mom, you don't understand the pressure I've been under. Javier has supported me all these years. Without him, I have nothing. I don't have a job, I don't have my own home. I don't have any savings." "And what about your other child?" I asked, the question a sharp, precise blade. "The child you were able to raise because it was convenient for your relationship? What about Paul?" Valerie flinched as if I had slapped her. "Paul is different," she said, her voice defensive. "He was born within my marriage to Javier. He was part of our plans. He was wanted. Arthur, Emily, and Andrea were also your children, Valerie," I said, my voice softening with a pain I couldn't conceal. "They also deserved to be part of someone's plans. They also deserved unconditional love. But I couldn't give it to them," she exploded, tears streaming down her face anew. "I was a kid when I had them. I didn't know how to be a mother. Every time Arthur cried, I cried too. Every time Emily had a nightmare, I had a panic attack. I couldn't handle them. I just couldn't." For the first time in this entire, awful conversation, I felt a genuine pang of compassion for her. Not as the woman who was trying to destroy my life, but as the frightened, overwhelmed girl she had been. "Then why didn't you ask me for help?" I asked, the old, familiar ache of that question surfacing after all these years. "Why didn't you come to me and say, 'Mom, I can't do this alone. I'm drowning. Help me'? We could have figured it out together. We could have raised them together. Because I was afraid you'd judge me," she cried. "I was afraid you'd think I was a failure, a bad mother." "Valerie," I said, my voice softening despite my best efforts. "I would have helped you. I would have moved heaven and earth to help you. But you didn't ask for help. You chose to run away. You chose to abandon them completely." "I know," she sobbed, the fight draining out of her completely. "I know. And I've lived with that guilt every single day. But Mom, now I can offer them something better. With the inheritance, I can give them a life I could never give them before." "With the inheritance, Valerie?" I said, my compassion hardening once more into resolve. "Are you even listening to yourself? It's not about the money. It's about 13 years of absence. It's about you writing down on a piece of paper that you relinquished all your rights. It's about you forming another family and forgetting that these 3 beautiful souls ever existed." Valerie straightened up, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the old, determined, manipulative Valerie. "Mom, legally," she said, her voice gaining a sharp edge, "I am still their biological mother. That paper I wrote, it wasn't notarized. It wasn't presented before a judge. Technically, it doesn't have full legal validity." And there it was, the true core of her, laid bare, calculating, manipulative. Seeing her children not as beings to love, but as legal obstacles or financial opportunities. "So," I said, my voice cold and flat, "this was never about getting your children back. This is about winning a legal case to access their money. That's what this has always been about. It's about both things," she insisted, a desperate plea in her eyes. "Mom, we can reach an agreement. I'll take the children, but you can visit them whenever you want. We can share the responsibility of raising them. And about the inheritance, we can divide it fairly. You've spent money on them all these years. It's only fair that you receive compensation." Compensation? The word felt like poison on my tongue. Valerie, do you honestly think I raised your children because I was expecting a financial reward? Do you think I took them to the doctor when they had a fever because I expected someone to pay me for my time? Do you think I stayed up all night holding them when they had nightmares because I thought there would be a monetary return on that investment? Stop. Just stop. Valerie covered her ears like a child who didn't want to hear a painful truth. I'm not going to stop, Valerie, I said, my voice low and fierce, because this is what you need to hear. I didn't raise those children as an investment. I raised them because I love them, because they are my blood, because when you abandon them, someone had to step in and love them unconditionally. Someone had to be their constant, their safe harbor, their home. And that someone was me. Valerie lowered her hands and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen in years, not since she was a teenager and had finally realized the gravity of a serious mistake she had made. It was a look of utter defeat, mixed with a glimmer of shame. "Mom," she said, her voice so small it was almost inaudible. "What do I have to do for you to forgive me?" The question caught me off guard. For years, I had imagined this moment. I had lain awake at night, crafting speeches, building walls, wondering what I would say if she ever came back and asked for forgiveness. But now that the moment was here, the words didn't come easily. "Valerie," I said slowly, "forgiveness isn't something you negotiate. It's not a transaction, something you get in exchange for doing the right things. Forgiveness is something you give when you choose to free yourself from the weight of resentment." "So, do you forgive me?" she asked, a tiny, desperate hope in her eyes. I looked at my daughter, this 39-year-old woman who was still, in so many ways, a lost little girl seeking her mother's approval. And I felt it, a complex, painful mixture of love, disappointment, sadness, and a faint, fragile thread of hope. "I forgive you for being a scared child who didn't know how to be a mother," I said, each word measured and deliberate. "I forgive you for making desperate decisions when you felt overwhelmed and alone. I forgive you for running away when the responsibility became too heavy for you to carry." A tentative, hopeful smile touched her lips, but I was not finished. "But," I continued, my voice firming, "I cannot forgive you for coming back only when money is involved. I cannot forgive you for threatening to send me to jail to get what you want. And I cannot, and I will not, allow you to hurt those children ever again." The smile vanished from her face, replaced by a bleak emptiness. "So there's nothing I can do?" "Yes," I replied firmly. "There is something you can do. You can go back to your life. You can work on your personal problems, your dependency, your choices. You can get real, genuine help. And when you have truly matured and changed, when you can offer genuine selfless love without expecting anything in return, then, perhaps, your children will decide for themselves if they want to meet you. But that will be their decision, on their terms, not yours. And the inheritance, Valerie, belongs to them. And I will make sure they receive every penny of it when they are old enough and wise enough to manage it responsibly." Just then, a court officer appeared in the hallway. "The recess is over," he announced. "The judge is ready to continue." As we turned to walk back into the courtroom, Valerie grabbed my arm gently. "Mom, one last question. If I withdraw the lawsuit now, would you allow me to see the children occasionally? For supervised visits?" I stopped and looked directly into her eyes, wanting her to see the absolute truth in mine. "That decision is not up to me, Valerie. It's up to them. Arthur, Emily, and Andrea. If they ever want to meet you, I will respect their decision, and I will not stand in their way. But I will not pressure them, I will not manipulate them. The choice must be entirely, 100%, their own." We entered the courtroom. The air felt different now, charged with the anticipation of a verdict. Judge Mason was already on the bench, waiting. Valerie and her lawyer returned to their table, but I could see something fundamental had shifted in her posture. She was slumped, smaller, as if our conversation in the hallway had drained the last of her fighting spirit, leaving only the hollow shell of her regrets. The final act was about to begin. Chapter 6, The Roots of Love, 4,000 Words, 1 Year. 365 days since the judge's gavel had fallen, sealing our fate and granting us the peace we so desperately needed. The change in our home was no longer just an absence of fear. It was a palpable, thriving presence of life, unfolding as it should. I was sitting in my small, sun-dappled garden, my fingers brushing the soil around the tomato plants I'd put in that spring. They were thriving, strong and green, promising a future harvest. It was a simple pleasure, this tending to living things, and it felt like a metaphor for everything we had endured. We had been transplanted, our roots torn and damaged, but given a safe place and steady care, we had not only survived, we were flourishing. Arthur had graduated with honors, his engineering degree a testament to his brilliant, determined mind. He'd accepted a job at a reputable firm, his future a wide, open road. Emily had been accepted into college with a partial scholarship, for literature, her words now paving her own path. And Andrea, now 17, was the vibrant, confident leader of her school's band, her guitar a conduit for the emotions she no longer kept locked inside. Uncle Arthur's inheritance sat untouched in their trust accounts, a safety net they had earned not through blood, but through the sheer resilience of their spirits. But the greatest inheritance, the one that couldn't be measured in dollars, was the peace they now carried. The constant, lurking shadow of abandonment had finally been banished by the unwavering certainty of my love. The back gate creaked open, and Mrs. Elma stepped into the garden, her arms cradling a tray covered with a checkered cloth. The scent of freshly made tamales, rich with corn and spice, wafted toward me. "Eleanor," she said, her voice a familiar, comforting melody. "I come bearing gifts. I know you've been busy with the garden, and I thought these would save you from cooking tonight." "Elma, you're a blessing," I said, getting up and brushing the dirt from my knees. "Come in, let's have some iced tea." We settled at the kitchen table, the tray of tamales between us like a centerpiece of our long friendship. But as we sipped our tea, I noticed that look on Elma's face, the one she gets when she has difficult news to deliver but doesn't know how to begin. I'd known her for over 40 years. I could read her like a favorite book. "Just say it, Elma," I prompted gently, placing my glass down. "Whatever it is, we've weathered worse storms." She sighed, setting her own glass down with a soft click. "It's about Valerie," she said finally. I felt the familiar, complicated knot tighten in my stomach, but I took a deep, steadying breath. "What happened now?" "It's not what you might think," she said, a strange note in her voice. It wasn't alarm. It was something closer to cautious optimism. "Theodore told me something. She enrolled in psychological therapy. She's been going religiously every week for the last 6 months." The news genuinely surprised me. I had expected to hear about another crisis, another desperate act. Not this. "Is she paying for it herself?" Alma nodded, a genuine smile touching her lips. "With her cleaning job, she's paying out of pocket for every session, and there's more. She got a day job. A receptionist position at a medical clinic. No more cleaning offices at night. Theodore says he saw her in town last week. He said she looks better, more stable. She had color in her cheeks, she was dressed neatly." I sat back in my chair, trying to process this. It was the complete opposite of everything I had braced myself for. This wasn't the trajectory of a woman plotting her next move. This was the slow, arduous path of someone trying to rebuild. "Has she?" I hesitated, almost afraid to ask. "Has she asked about the children?" "No," Elma said, and this seemed to be the most significant piece of information for her. "In fact, when a mutual acquaintance mentioned that you had visited her last year, she apparently replied that her mom had already done enough for her. She said now it was her turn to prove she could change without anyone's help." A strange, Unexpected feeling bloomed in my chest. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was something quieter, more tentative. It was pride. For the first time in over a decade, I felt a flicker of genuine pride for my daughter. She was finally fighting the right battle, not in a courtroom against me, but within herself, for herself. That afternoon, Andrea came home from school. She dropped her backpack by the door and came to find me in the kitchen, her expression thoughtful, her brow furrowed in a way I knew meant she was wrestling with a big question. "Grandma," she began, sliding into the chair opposite me, "can I ask you something?" "Always, my love," I replied, pushing the plate of tamales toward her. "You know you can ask me anything." She picked at the edge of the checkered cloth, not meeting my eyes. "Do you think I'll ever want to meet my biological mom?" The question didn't surprise me. I had known this moment would come eventually. The curiosity was a natural, human thing. The trial had been about the past. This question was about the future. I reached across the table and took her hand. "I don't know, Andrea," I said honestly. "That's a decision only you can make when and if you ever feel ready. There's no right or wrong answer." She looked up, her eyes searching mine. "Would you be upset if someday I decided I did want to meet her?" "No, my love," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. "I would be proud of you. I would be proud of you for having the courage and the emotional maturity to make your own decision as a responsible young adult. It would be your choice, for your reasons." "And if I decided I never wanted to meet her?" she asked, her voice small. "If I decided that the family I have is enough?" I squeezed her hand. "Then I would be proud of that too. I would be proud of you for knowing your own heart, for understanding your own boundaries, and for honoring the family that has loved you unconditionally. The decision, my darling girl, is completely and utterly yours. I will support you, whatever you choose." A look of profound relief washed over her face. The weight of the question hadn't been in the question itself, but in the fear of my reaction. By giving her the freedom to choose, I had given her the greatest gift I could: ownership of her own story. That night, as I prepared dinner, I let my mind drift back over the entire painful journey. For years, I had carried a reservoir of resentment toward Valerie. Resentment for leaving me with a responsibility that, by all rights, should not have been mine to carry alone. Resentment for the financial strain, the sleepless nights, the constant worry. Resentment for her ability to forget her children, to build a new life as if the old one had never existed. And a deep, burning resentment for her return, which was not born of love, but of greed. But now, sitting in the quiet contentment of my kitchen, with the sounds of my grandchildren living their lives around me, I realized something fundamental. That resentment, which I had held onto for so long, had been a chain. It had tied me to her, to the pain, to the anger. It had been a weight in my pocket, a bitter taste on my tongue. And when I had finally let it go, not for her, but for me, I had freed myself. The act of going to her apartment with groceries hadn't been about absolving her. It had been about severing that last, stubborn link of bitterness in my own soul. Last week, Emily had turned 19. We'd had a small celebration, just the four of us, with a cake and too much laughter. In a quiet moment, she had pulled me aside. "Grandma," she'd said, her eyes serious, "thank you for saving us, but more than that. Thank you for teaching us that true love doesn't abandon, it stays, it fights, it shows up every single day, even when it's hard. You taught us what a mother really is." Arthur, now 21, had full access to his inheritance. The first thing he did, before buying a car or making any grand plans for himself, was to transfer $10,000 into my bank account. "For everything you spent on us all these years," he'd told me, his voice thick with emotion. "For all the things you went without so we could have what we needed." I had accepted the money, not because I needed it, my needs were simple, but because I understood it was important for him to give it. It was his way of honoring the sacrifice, of balancing the scales in his own heart. It was an act of love, and I would not dishonor it by refusing. Sometimes, In the deepest quiet of the night, I would allow myself to wonder, what would have happened if Valerie had come back for the right reasons? If she had appeared on my doorstep, not with a lawyer, but with tears of genuine remorse? If she had asked for forgiveness instead of demanding custody? If she had shown a flicker of the woman she was now trying to become all those months ago? Maybe, just maybe, we could have found a way to coexist. Perhaps we could have built something resembling an extended family, a complex, patchwork quilt of relationships. Maybe my grandchildren would have had the opportunity to know their biological mother under healthy, supervised circumstances, to satisfy their natural curiosity without the poison of ulterior motives. But life isn't a story of maybes. It's the story of the decisions we make with the information and the emotional capacity we have in the moment. We don't get to rewrite our pasts, we only get to live with the consequences and build our futures from the rubble. And I had made my decisions. I chose to open my door to 3 dirty, hungry, terrified children. I chose to love them unconditionally when their own mother could not. I chose to sacrifice my comfort, my security, and my peace of mind to give them a foundation of stability. And when the time came to defend them, to protect the life we had built, I chose to fight for them with every ounce of strength I possessed. I regretted none of it, not a single sleepless night, not a single missed payment on a bill, not a single tear shed in solitude. It had all been worth it. Every hard choice had led us to this moment, to this kitchen, to this peace. Today, as I watched Andrea practice a new, complicated riff on her guitar, as I listened to Emily in her room, excitedly talking on the phone about her college dorm plans, and as I looked at the text from Arthur showing a blueprint from his new job, I knew, with a certainty that was as deep and as solid as the earth beneath my feet, that I had made the right decisions. They were not just survivors, they were empathetic, hardworking, kind, and responsible adults. They were good people, who would contribute positively to the world. They were living, breathing proof that unconditional love and firm, necessary boundaries could not only coexist, but could create something truly beautiful. Sometimes people would ask me, cautiously, if I hated Valerie for what she had done. The answer was always, and would always be, no, I did not hate her. But I did not excuse her either. I understood that she was young when she had her children. I understood that motherhood can be overwhelming, a tsunami of responsibility that drowns the unprepared. I understood that we are all human, and we all make mistakes. But I also understood that some mistakes are not mere stumbles. They are choices that define the very core of who you are. Choosing to abandon your children is not a mistake. It is a decision that carves a canyon between who you were and who you become. Valerie had chosen her new life over her children. She had chosen a man approval over her maternal duty. She had chosen, again and again, the path of least resistance, even when that path led her away from the 3 souls who needed her most. I had chosen the children over my own comfort. I had chosen responsibility over freedom. I had chosen love over ease. We had both lived with the consequences of our decisions. The difference was, I could lay my head on my pillow every single night and sleep a deep, untroubled sleep, knowing that I had always, without fail, put the well-being of those children first. I had loved them when it was easy and when it was back-breakingly hard. I had shown up. She would have to live forever with the knowledge that she had abandoned them when they needed her most, that she had written them out of her story, that her return was not for love, but for money. That was her consequence to carry. If there was one ultimate lesson in all of this, it was that justice doesn't always arrive with the dramatic flair of punishment. Sometimes, justice is a quiet, natural force. It is simply each person receiving exactly what their actions have sown. I deserved the fierce, unwavering, unconditional love of my grandchildren because I had planted that love, tended it, and watered it with my own tears and sweat for 13 long years. Valerie deserved the absence of that love because she had chosen to be absent. She had left the field fallow and was surprised to find no harvest when she finally returned. It wasn't revenge, it was cause and effect. It was the natural, inevitable consequence of our choices. And perhaps, if she had truly changed, if she was genuinely working on herself in that therapist's office, if she was learning to stand on her own 2 feet behind that receptionist's desk, then someday, my grandchildren might look at the woman she was becoming and decide to offer her a chance. A sliver of grace. But it would be their decision. On their terms, when they were ready. In the meantime, I would continue to be what I had always been, what I had chosen to be on that rainy Tuesday 13 years ago, their grandmother, their protector, their safe harbor, their unwavering, constant, unconditional love. Because that is how true love works. It doesn't abandon. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't set conditions. It doesn't keep a record of wrongs. It simply is. It is as constant as the dawn, pushing back the darkness night after night. It is as strong as the roots of an old tree, holding fast through every storm. It is as silent and as powerful as a prayer that never, ever ends. And that, at the end of the day, after all the court battles and the heartache and the years of struggle, is enough. It is more than enough. It is everything. Chapter 7. The Constant Dawn. 4,000 words. The years have a way of softening the sharpest edges of memory. The visceral panic of the courtroom, the acid taste of Valerie's threats. The bone-deep exhaustion of those first years, they don't vanish. But they recede, like a tide pulling back from the shore, leaving behind smoother stones and a wider, more peaceful beach. 5 years after the trial, the restraining order expired. There was no fanfare, no legal notice. It simply ceased to be, like a spell lifting at dawn. The protection it had offered had done its job. We had healed. The children, no. The young adults my grandchildren had become were so firmly rooted in their own lives, so secure in the love that had nurtured them, that the expiration of a piece of paper was a non-event. The True Shield was no longer a court order. It was the family we had built. Arthur, at 25, was thriving in his engineering career. But his greatest pride was the small nonprofit he'd started with a portion of his inheritance, offering tutoring and mentorship to kids from unstable homes. He'd found his purpose in being the steady presence he'd once needed. Emily had graduated college and was working as an editor for a small publishing house, her love for words now shaping the stories of others. And Andrea, my wild-hearted girl, was in her final year of a music degree, her compositions a complex, beautiful map of the journey from a scared child to a woman who knew her own strength. The decision to let the restraining order lapse without renewal was a conscious one. It was a declaration to myself more than anyone that we were no longer operating from a place of fear. We were living from a place of strength. The choice about Valerie, I had told them all, was now entirely in their hands. The legal barrier was gone. The door was closed, but it was no longer locked from the outside. If they ever wanted to open it, the power was theirs. It was Andrea, perhaps inevitably, who first broached the subject again. She was home for a weekend visit, the house once again filled with the sound of her guitar, now accompanied by the sophisticated hum of a laptop running music production software. We were in the garden, harvesting the last of the summer tomatoes. "Grandma," she said, her fingers deftly plucking a ripe, red fruit from the vine. "I've been thinking about my biological mom. I didn't stop my work, but I gave her my full attention." "I thought you might be," I said gently. "The thing is," she continued, brushing a stray curl from her forehead, "I don't feel angry anymore. I don't even feel curious, really. But I feel, I don't know, a sense of something unfinished, not for me, but for the story, our story." She looked at me, her eyes clear and thoughtful. "I think I'd like to know if the work she was doing was real. I'd like to see if the change stuck." My heart, so steady these past years, gave a small, familiar lurch. This was it. The moment I had both prepared for and quietly dreaded. Not because I was afraid of losing her, but because I was afraid of her being hurt all over again. "What are you thinking of doing?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "I was thinking of writing a letter," she said. "Just a short one, from me. Not from all of us. Saying that I'd be willing to meet, just once, in a public place. No expectations, just to see." I put my basket down and took her hands, which were smudged with garden soil. "Andrea, you know I will support you in whatever you decide. But you also know that you owe her nothing. Not a meeting, not a letter, not a single moment of your time. Your compassion does you credit, but it should not come at the cost of your peace." "I know," she said, squeezing my hands. "But this isn't about her, Grandma. Not really, this is about me. I need to look her in the eye, just once, as the person I am now, not the scared kid I was then. I need to close that chapter for myself, on my own terms." How could I argue with that? She was no longer a child I needed to protect from. The truth, she was a woman, seeking her own closure. "Then you should do it," I said, my voice thick with a love so fierce it threatened to overwhelm me. "And I will be right here, no matter what happens." She wrote the letter. A simple, 3-paragraph note. She didn't give her address or phone number, only an email address she had created specifically for this purpose. She mailed it to the medical clinic where, according to the last information we had, Valerie worked. The wait that followed was suspended. Time seemed to slow. Every day, Andrea would check that anonymous email account with a quiet tension I recognized all too well. A part of me hoped the letter had been lost, that Valerie had moved on, that we could continue in our peaceful existence without this disruption. But 3 weeks later, a reply came. Andrea called me, her voice a mixture of excitement and nerves. She wrote back, "Grandma," she said she would be honored to meet. That she understands completely if I change my mind, but that she will be at the Riverside Cafe next Saturday at 2 p.m. And she will wait for an hour, just in case. The week passed in a blur. Arthur and Emily called constantly, offering their sister support, their own feelings about the meeting complex and varied. Arthur was cautiously supportive but ready to drive down and intervene at a moment's notice. Emily was more hesitant, worried it would open old wounds. But they both respected Andrea's choice. We had raised them to be their own people. Saturday arrived, sunny and clear. Andrea dressed simply in jeans and a sweater, her guitar case slung over her back a shield and a comfort. "I have a rehearsal after," she explained, though we both knew it was more than that. It was a tangible piece of the identity she had built, something to remind her of who she was. "Do you want me to drive you?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "No," she said, giving me a tight hug. "I need to do this alone. But I'll call you the second it's over." I watched her drive away, my brave, beautiful girl, and the house felt emptier than it had in years. I busied myself with chores, but my mind was at the Riverside Cafe. I prayed for her strength, for her peace. I did not pray for Valerie. That was a bridge too far for my heart, even now. An hour and a half later, my phone rang. I snatched it up. "Grandma." Andrea's voice was calm, but I could hear the slight tremor of spent adrenaline beneath it. "I'm here, my love. How are you? How did it go?" There was a long pause. It was strange, sad, but good, I think. She took a deep breath. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a table in the corner. She looked older. Her hair has some gray in it. But she looked healthy, clear-eyed. She stood up when she saw me, and she didn't try to hug me. She just said, "Thank you for coming." My throat tightened. That simple act of respect, of understanding the boundaries, meant more than any dramatic speech could have. "What did you talk about?" I asked softly. "Not much, at first. The weather. The cafe. It was awkward. Then she asked me about my music, and I told her. I told her about my degree, about my band, about the pieces I'm writing. And she listened, Grandma, she really listened. She didn't bring up the past, she didn't ask about Arthur or Emily, she didn't mention the money. She just asked about me. I closed my eyes, a wave of relief washing over me. This was the best possible scenario. Then, Andrea continued, her voice dropping. She apologized. Not a big, dramatic thing. She just said, Andrea, I need to tell you that I am so deeply, profoundly sorry for the pain I caused you, for leaving you. For all of it, there is no excuse. I was selfish and scared, and I made unforgivable choices. I don't expect your forgiveness, but you deserve to hear the apology. Andrea's voice broke slightly. She meant it, Grandma. I could see it in her eyes. It was real. Tears streamed down my face now, silent and cleansing. This was the repentance I had told her was necessary all those years ago in her shabby apartment. It had taken half a decade, but it had finally arrived. What did you say? I whispered. I told her. I told her that I appreciated the apology, and I told her that I had a good life, a great life, that I was loved and happy. I think she needed to hear that. She started to cry then, but quietly. She just nodded and said, I'm so glad. That's all I've ever wanted to know. They had talked for less than an hour. Andrea said she had to get to her rehearsal. Valerie had nodded, understanding the cue. She had stood up and again did not try to touch her. She just said, Thank you for this gift. I will never forget it. And then she left. How do you feel? I asked my granddaughter, my heart in my throat. I feel light, Andrea said, and I could hear the truth of it in her voice. The curiosity is gone. The what if is gone. I saw her. She's a person. A flawed, complicated person who did a terrible thing, but who is trying, in her own way, to be better. And that's enough for me. I don't need to see her again. I don't need a relationship, but I'm glad I went. I needed to see for myself that the monster in my childhood memories was just a broken woman. It makes our story cleaner, somehow. When she came home, she was serene. The chapter was closed. She had written the ending she needed. Her meeting opened a door, not for a flood of renewed contact, but for a subtle shift in the atmosphere. A few months later, Emily, after long discussions with her therapist, decided she too wanted to send a letter. Not to meet, but to ask the questions that had haunted her. She wrote a long, beautifully worded, brutally honest letter about her memories of hunger and silence, about the fear, about what it felt like to be forgotten. She asked Valerie, point blank, why she had been able to raise Paul but not them. Valerie's reply to Emily was even longer. She didn't defend herself. She answered every question with a stark, painful honesty that mirrored Emily's own. She explained her youth, her profound depression, her overwhelming sense of failure. And she explained Javier not as an excuse, but as a context for her weakness. She admitted that staying with Paul was the path of least resistance, the choice that allowed her to keep the man she depended on, and that abandoning her first children was the catastrophic price of that dependency. She ended the letter by telling Emily that her strength and clarity were an inspiration, and that she was so proud of the woman she had become. Emily showed me the letter. It was heartbreaking and cathartic. It doesn't fix anything, Emily said, her eyes dry. But it answers the questions. And for me, that's what I needed. I don't need to meet her. The letter was enough. Arthur has never made contact. He has made his peace in a different way. He has channeled all that protective energy into his work with children. He told me once, I don't need to hear her apologies, Grandma. I see her face in the faces of the parents who fail their kids every day. And I see you in the faces of the grandparents and foster parents who step in. That's the story that matters to me. That's the cycle I'm trying to help break. His closure was found in action, in being the solution. And so, life moved on, but on a new, even firmer foundation. The ghosts had been laid to rest, not by a court, but by time, by growth, and by the courageous choices of the children who had become adults. Just last week, I was cleaning out the hall closet, a lifetime of memories tucked into boxes and on shelves. My hand brushed against something tucked away in the very back, behind the winter coats. I pulled it out. It was the yellow envelope. I hadn't seen it in years. It was dustier now, more faded, the metal brad rusted at the edges. I carried it to the kitchen table and sat down, my heart surprisingly calm. I opened it, the rusted clasp protesting with a faint squeak. I spilled the contents onto the table. The photos of the children, so small and vulnerable. Valerie's desperate, selfish letters. The renunciation of parental rights. The printed text messages, the ink slightly faded. They were no longer weapons or shields. They were just artifacts. The fossil record of a painful, distant epoch in our family's history. I gathered them up, all of them. I didn't reread them. I didn't need to. Their power over us was gone. I walked to the fireplace, the same fireplace I had stoked to keep those 3 shivering children warm on that long-ago rainy Tuesday, and I placed the entire contents of the yellow envelope inside. I struck a match, watched the flame catch and grow, and I let it all burn. The paper curled and blackened, the words of anger and abandonment turning to smoke and ash. I watched until there was nothing left but a pile of gray embers. It was not an act of destruction, but of release. A final, ritualistic letting go. The story that began with a knock on the door and a yellow envelope filled with secrets ends with another knock, the gentle knock of opportunity and closure, chosen by the very lives I fought to protect, and the quiet burning of that same envelope, its secrets no longer needed, its truths absorbed into the strong, resilient fabric of our lives. The love remained. It was the only thing that ever truly did. Constant, strong, silent, unbreakable. It was, and always will be, enough. 10 years. A full decade since the courtroom doors swung shut, sealing a verdict that was less a ending and more a profound beginning. If the first 5 years were about healing, the second 5 have been about flourishing. There is a richness to our lives now that feels earned, a deep, resonant joy that only comes from having known its opposite. I am 77 years old now. The arthritis in my hands is a more constant companion, a subtle reminder of the years of hard work, but it's a pain I wear with a strange sort of pride. These hands have built a family. They have rocked babies, bandaged knees, held trembling shoulders, and clenched into fists of determination in a cold courtroom. They have earned their ache. Our home, once a refuge for 3 traumatized children, has transformed into a bustling hub for a sprawling, chosen family. It is no longer just my house. It is the family's North Star, the place everyone orbits back to. Arthur is 30 now, not just an engineer but a visionary, his nonprofit having grown beyond tutoring into providing stable housing for single parents and their children. He married a wonderful, sharp-witted teacher named Lena 2 years ago, and they are expecting their first child. My first great-grandchild. The circle, unbroken, preparing to widen. When Arthur told me the news, he held my hands, his own so strong and sure. "You see, Grandma," he'd said, his eyes shining. "The cycle ends with us. This baby will only know safety. It will only know love. Because of you." Emily, 28, is a senior editor now, her quiet intensity having found its perfect outlet. She lives in a cozy apartment filled with books and plants, and she is dating a gentle, soft-spoken librarian named David. They spend their weekends hiking and volunteering at the animal shelter. Her peace is a quiet, steady flame, a world away from the silent, terrified little girl who arrived on my doorstep. She dedicated her first published anthology to Eleanor Vance, who taught me that family is a verb. And Andrea, 26, is a force of nature. Her music degree led her not to a concert hall, but to a community center, where she runs music therapy programs for at-risk youth. Her band is locally famous, and their songs speak of resilience, of finding your voice, of building a home within yourself. She is the living embodiment of the spirit I always knew she possessed. She still comes over every Sunday for dinner, her guitar case a permanent fixture by the door. The inheritance from my brother was accessed, each of them taking their share on their 21st birthdays. But the money, in the end, was almost an afterthought. Arthur used his to seed his nonprofit. Emily invested hers, creating a safety net that allows her to take creative risks. Andrea used hers to fund the community center's music program for 5 years. They had already received their true inheritance: a childhood, an education, a sense of self-worth, and the unshakable knowledge that they were loved. The money was just a tool to build upon that foundation. Life is full in a way I could never have imagined during those lean, fearful years. The doorbell rings constantly, but now it's a welcome sound. It's Lena, bringing over ultrasound pictures. It's David, carrying a bag of fresh produce from the farmer's market. It's one of Andrea's bandmates, coming over to practice in the garage. The silence of those early years has been replaced by a symphony of life, and I am its grateful, contented conductor. And yet, the past is never truly gone. It's a thread woven into the fabric of our present, its color adding depth and contrast to the overall pattern. The story of Valerie is a part of that pattern. After Andrea's meeting and Emily's letter exchange, a fragile, distant peace was brokered. There is no relationship, but there is, for the first time, a mutual and respectful absence. The war is over. Occasionally, through the intricate grapevine of our small town, I would hear snippets. She was still at the medical clinic, had been promoted to office manager. She was still in therapy. She had a small circle of friends. She lived a quiet, simple life. There were no more men like Javier, no more financial crises, no more dramatic pleas. She had found a kind of stability in solitude. I found myself hoping, in a detached way, that she had found some measure of peace too. Then, one crisp autumn afternoon, a letter arrived. It was not for the children, it was for me. The handwriting on the envelope was familiar, but different, neater, more measured, devoid of the frantic energy it once held. My name and address were written with a careful, almost reverent precision. My hands did not tremble as I opened it. There was no yellow envelope anymore, no secret weapon to unveil. There was just a single sheet of high-quality paper, and the words of my daughter. Dear Mom, I am writing this letter not with any expectation of a reply, but because there are things I need to say to you, and after all this time, I believe I have finally found the words that are not born of desperation or manipulation. First and foremost, thank you. Thank you for the groceries you brought to my apartment all those years ago. In my darkest hour, when I had lost everything, including my own self-respect, that simple act of kindness from you was a lifeline. It was the first time I understood that love could be tough and compassionate at the same time. You didn't rescue me, but you showed me I was not entirely forsaken. You showed me what a mother's love, in its truest form, could look like. Second, I am sorry. I have apologized to Andrea and to Emily, and I know Arthur has no need for my words. But my apology to you is the most important, and the most overdue. I am sorry for the burden I placed on you. I am sorry for the years I stole from your retirement, for the financial strain, for the worry lines I etched on your face. I am sorry for the legal battle, for the threats, for the sheer, unmitigated cruelty of my actions. There is no excuse. I was broken, and in my brokenness, I tried to break you, the one person who had never given up on me. For that, I will be ashamed for the rest of my life. You were right about everything. About Javier, about my motives, about the need for me to stand on my own. It took me losing everything to finally understand that. The therapy you suggested saved my life. The hard work of building a life for myself, paycheck by paycheck, saved my soul. I understand now that the inheritance was never mine to fight for. It was theirs, and you were its perfect guardian. I know I can never be your daughter again in the way I should have been. The damage is too deep, the history too painful, I accept that. But I want you to know that the woman you see now, the one who pays her bills, who shows up for her job, who tries to be kind, is the woman you helped create. Not by coddling me, but by holding a mirror to my failures and showing me, through your own unwavering example, what strength and integrity look like. I heard about Arthur's baby. Please tell him I am happy for him. The world needs more fathers like he will be. The world needs more families like the one you built. I will not write again. This is my final piece of business with the past. I needed you to know that the seeds of decency you tried to plant in me all those years ago, while I was too selfish to see them, did not all die. Some lay dormant in the cold, hard ground, and it took a long winter for them to finally, slowly, push their way toward the Sunday. You were a wonderful mother. You are a magnificent grandmother. I am so sorry I was not the daughter you deserved. With love and forever regret, Valerie. I read the letter once. Then, I read it again, slowly, letting each word, each confession, each hard-won insight, settle into my soul. I did not cry. I felt a quiet, profound sense of completion. This was the true end of the story. Not with a gavel, but with a grace note. I folded the letter carefully and placed it not in a yellow envelope to be hidden away, but in my personal keepsake box, alongside Arthur's first engineering schematic, Emily's first published poem, and a photo of Andrea's first band performance. It belonged there, not as a weapon or a secret, but as a testament to the redemptive, if painful, power of truth and time. I did not show the letter to the children. It was not for them. This was a private transaction between a mother and a daughter, a final settling of accounts that had been left open for far too long. They had their own closure. This was mine. A few days later, Arthur and Lena came over for dinner. Lena was glowing, her hand often resting on her rounding belly. As we sat in the living room after eating, the conversation turned, as it often did, to the baby. "We've been thinking about names," Arthur said, his arm wrapped around Lena's shoulders. "Oh?" I said, sipping my tea. "Any front-runners?" Arthur and Lena exchanged a look, a silent, loving communication that filled my heart with joy. "Well," Lena said, her voice soft. "If it's a girl, we were thinking we'd like to name her Eleanor." The air left my lungs. I looked at my grandson, my brave, beautiful boy, and saw the tears in his eyes. "We want her to carry the name of the strongest, most loving person we know," Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion. "We want her to know that her name means resilience. It means family. It means home." I could not speak. The gratitude that washed over me was so immense it was dizzying. All the years of struggle, of fear, of relentless love, crystallized in that single, breathtaking moment. The legacy was not one of pain and abandonment, but of strength and unconditional love. It would be carried forward in the name of a new, innocent life. Later that night, after they had gone home, I stood at my bedroom window, looking out at the star-dusted sky. The harvest moon was full and bright, casting a silvery light over my garden. The tomato plants were gone for the season, the earth resting, but I knew what lay dormant beneath the surface, waiting for the right conditions to grow again. I thought of Valerie's letter. The seeds of decency did not all die. I thought of Arthur's words. The cycle ends with us. We had all, in our own ways, been planting seeds. Valerie, in her desperate, broken youth, had planted seeds of chaos and pain. I, in response, had planted seeds of order and love. For years, it seemed only my garden was growing, but life is a patient force. Her seeds, though planted in barren soil, had eventually, against all odds, found a way to grow into something resembling peace. Not a beautiful, flourishing garden like ours, but a hardy, resilient weed that had learned to stand on its own. And my seeds? They had produced a harvest beyond my wildest dreams. A family, a legacy, a future. The story that began with a knock on the door and a desperate abandonment, that wound its way through courtrooms and yellow envelopes, through threats and revelations, through pain and healing, ends here. Not with a final, dramatic confrontation, but with a quiet autumn night, with the promise of a baby girl named Eleanor, with a letter of hard-won peace. With a garden put to bed for the winter, its harvest safely gathered in. The love was the constant. It was the seed and the soil, the rain and the sun, the harvest and the feast. It was the beginning, the middle, and it will be the end. It is enough, it is everything. The first time I held my great-granddaughter in my arms, the world did not so much shift as it simply clicked into place. All the jagged pieces of our family's history, the fractures and the repairs, the losses and the redemptions, seemed to smooth into a single, perfect, unbroken circle. Little Eleanor, named for me, was a tiny, warm weight of pure potential. She would never know the sound of a gavel echoing in a courtroom. She would never feel the cold dread of abandonment. She would only know the fortress of love we had built, stone by stone, over decades. Her birth was the beginning of a new era in our home. The quiet, contented rhythm of my later years was joyfully appended by the sounds of a newborn, the soft coos, the indignant cries, the sweet, milky scent of her that seemed to permeate every room. Arthur was a natural father, his large, engineer's hands impossibly gentle as he changed diapers and cradled her to his chest. Lena was a vision of serene strength. And my grandchildren, no, these grown adults reverted to a state of wondrous awe around the baby, their sophisticated lives momentarily forgotten in the simple magic of her tiny, grasping fingers. It was during one of these tranquil afternoons, with baby Ellie sleeping in a bassinet by the window, that Arthur broached a subject I knew had been lingering in the air for some time. "Grandma," he began, his voice careful. "Lena and we've been talking. About the future. About Ellie's future." I looked at him, my heart so full of love for this man he had become. "Go on," I encouraged softly. "We want her to know all of her story," he said. "Not just the beautiful part, the part that ends with you and with us. We want her to understand resilience, not as an abstract concept, but as her inheritance. We want her to know where she comes from, the whole truth of it." I felt a prickle of apprehension, a ghost of the old protectiveness. "That's a heavy history for such small shoulders, Arthur." "It is," he agreed. "And we would be careful. We would wait until she's old enough. But we don't want secrets. Secrets have a way of festering. The truth, even the hard truth, set us free. We believe it can do the same for her." He paused, choosing his next words with the same precision he used in his work. "And that includes the truth about Valerie." The name, spoken in this sunlit room filled with new life, no longer carried the sting it once did. It was just a name now, a fact of our history, like the date of a war that had long since ended. "What are?" I asked. "We were thinking," Lena interjected, her voice gentle but firm, "that if Valerie is still stable, if she is still the woman from that letter, perhaps, when Ellie is older, there could be a meeting, a single, supervised meeting, so that she can see the full circle. So she can understand that people can change, that stories can have complex, non-storybook endings." I looked from Arthur's determined face to Lena's compassionate one, and then to the sleeping, innocent face of my great-granddaughter. They were not asking for a relationship. They were asking for a lesson in grace. They were the living proof that the cycle of trauma could be broken, and now they were looking for a way to teach that lesson to the next generation. "It's your decision," I said finally, my voice thick with emotion. "You are her parents. You have built a life so strong, so secure, that you are not afraid of the past. That is the greatest victory I could ever have hoped for. I trust your judgment completely." The decision was made, not with haste, but with the quiet deliberation that now characterized our family's major choices. It was filed away as a possibility for the distant future, a conversation for when Ellie was a curious child, not a sleeping infant. Life, in its relentless and beautiful forward march, continued. Ellie grew from a baby to a toddler, her first words, Mama, Dada, and, to my immense joy, Gigi filling the house with a new kind of music. My role had evolved once again. I was not just the grandmother anymore. I was the great-grandmother, the matriarch, the keeper of the stories. I told Ellie simplified versions of them, about her daddy who built things to help people, about her Aunt Emily who painted pictures with words, about her Aunt Andrea who made the guitar sing. The harder stories were for another day. It was on Ellie's second birthday, a chaotic and joyful affair in my backyard, that the past made its most unexpected and gentle return. The party was in full swing, children shrieking with laughter, adults chatting, the scent of grilled food and birthday cake in the air. Andrea was playing a lively tune on her guitar, and Ellie was dancing in that unsteady, glorious way toddlers do, her chubby arms waving. I was refilling the lemonade pitcher when I saw him. A boy, standing hesitantly, at the edge of the garden gate. He was about 14, tall and lanky, with a familiar, intelligent brow and a nervous expression. He was holding a small, clumsily wrapped present. My heart stopped. I knew who he was before Arthur, who had also seen him, walked slowly toward the gate. It was Paul, Valerie's son. Javier's son, Ellie's uncle. Arthur opened the gate, his body language calm but guarded. I saw him speak to the boy, his voice too low for me to hear. The boy nodded, his eyes wide, and handed Arthur the present. They spoke for a minute longer, and then the boy nodded again, shoved his hands in his pockets, and walked quickly away, disappearing down the street. The party continued around us, the joyful noise a stark contrast to the silent, monumental moment that had just occurred. Arthur stood by the gate for a long moment, the small present in his hand, before he turned and walked back toward us. His face was unreadable. He came straight to me, the crowd seeming to part for him. He held out the present. Taped to the top was a small, folded note. He handed it to me. With trembling fingers, I opened it. Mrs. Vance, my name is Paul Dawson. My mom is Valerie. She doesn't know I'm here. I found your address in some of her old papers. I've been curious about my brother and sisters for a long time. My dad doesn't like to talk about them. Mom gets sad if I ask. I heard about the baby, my niece. I wanted to give her something. It's not much. I used my allowance. My mom is doing okay. She talks about you sometimes. She says you're the strongest person she knows. I just wanted to see for myself. You don't have to write back or anything. I just wanted to say hello. Paul, I looked up at Arthur, my vision blurring with tears. The circle was not just unbroken, it was expanding in ways I had never dared to imagine. What was in the box? I whispered. Arthur opened it. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a small, hand-carved wooden bird. It was simple, a little rough in places, but made with obvious care and patience. He carved this, Arthur said, his voice full of wonder. He carved this for her. We stood there, in the middle of the birthday celebration, surrounded by the family we had built, holding a gift from a boy who was, against all odds, a part of it. He was not a ghost from the past. He was a shy, curious teenager reaching out from the periphery of our world. We never told Valerie about Paul's visit. It felt like his secret to keep, his own small act of forging a connection. Arthur, after much thought, wrote him a brief, kind letter back, thanking him for the gift and telling him that Ellie loved it. He included a photo of her holding the wooden bird. He did not invite him back, not yet. But he left the door open, just a crack. It was a thread, thin and delicate, connecting two branches of a family tree that had been violently split apart. That thread, it turned out, was stronger than it looked. A few months later, a letter arrived for Arthur. It was from Paul's school counselor. Paul, it seemed, had been struggling. Javier was largely absent from his life, and while Valerie was stable, she was emotionally distant, still carrying the weight of her own history. The counselor, aware of the complex family dynamics, wondered if Arthur, as an adult male relative who had built a successful and stable life, might be willing to become a sort of mentor to Paul. Not a father figure, but a positive influence, a guide. Arthur brought the letter to me. We sat at the same kitchen table where so many of our life's most difficult decisions had been made. "What do you think, Grandma?" he asked, the weight of the request heavy in his eyes. I thought of the scared, 7-year-old boy Arthur had once been. I thought of the lonely 14-year-old boy Paul was now. I thought of the legacy we were trying to build, one of breaking cycles, not perpetuating them. I think, I said slowly, that we have a chance to give a boy something we never could give his mother. I think we have a chance to offer him a glimpse of the family he should have been a part of. Not to rewrite the past, but to change his future. I reached out and took his hand. The question is that a burden you are willing to carry? It is not your responsibility, Arthur. You have your own family now. Arthur was silent for a long time, looking out at the garden where his daughter now played. It's not a burden, he said finally, his voice firm. It's a privilege. It's the next right thing. And so the circle widened once more. Arthur began meeting Paul for burgers every other week. Slowly, cautiously, a relationship began to form. Paul, it turned out, had a keen interest in how things worked. Arthur started bringing him to his nonprofit's workshop on Saturdays. Paul, who had been withdrawn and struggling in school, began to blossom under the attention of a man who saw potential in him, not just the shadow of his parents' mistakes. Valerie, we learned through Paul, was aware of the meetings. She had been terrified at first, fearful that we would take him from her too. But when she saw the positive change in her son, his grades improving, his demeanor brightening, she gave her silent, grateful blessing. It was the final, quiet surrender of the war she had once waged against us. One evening, Arthur and Paul were in the garage, working on a project for the community garden Arthur's nonprofit was building. Lena and I were in the kitchen with Ellie. The back door was open, and we could hear their voices, the deep, patient tone of Arthur mingling with Paul's higher, eager one. Lena looked at me, her eyes soft. "He's a good kid," she said. "He just needed someone to see it." I nodded, my heart too full for words. I looked out at the garage, at the two figures bent over a workbench, the man who had been an abandoned boy and the boy who was being shown he did not have to be lost. The cycle was not just broken, it was being used as a blueprint for something new, something stronger. The story that began with a mother's abandonment now held space for a nephew's redemption. The love that had once been a fortress for 3 was now a sanctuary for 4, and now, for a 5th, it did not discriminate. It did not hold grudges, it simply saw a need and reached out. The harvest from the seeds I had planted so long ago was more abundant than I had ever dreamed. It was feeding generations. It was healing wounds I hadn't even known were still open. The circle was unbroken. And it was forever expanding. Time, in my 80s, is no longer a river rushing forward, but a deep, wide lake. The surface is calm, reflecting the sky of the present, but its depths hold the entire history of our lives, every joy and every sorrow preserved in the cool, quiet dark. I am content here, on the shore of this lake, watching the reflections of my family dance upon the water. My body may be frail, a vessel showing its wear, but my spirit feels lighter than it has in 60 years. The heavy work is done. The building is complete. Now, I am its proud, peaceful curator. The legacy we built is no longer an abstract concept. It is a living, breathing entity with a life of its own. Arthur's nonprofit, the Vance Foundation, has become a cornerstone of our community. It no longer just provides tutoring and housing. It runs family counseling centers, job placement programs, and a thriving community garden, the very one Paul helped build that feeds hundreds. The local paper did a feature on him last year, calling him a visionary of compassion. He'd brought the article to me, his cheeks flushed with a humble pride. "It's all because of you, Grandma," he'd said. But I'd shook my head. "No, my love, it's because of the man you chose to become." Emily published her first novel. It is a powerful, haunting story about three siblings raised by their grandmother, exploring themes of memory, abandonment, and the families we choose. She dedicated it to Eleanor, who taught me that the most powerful stories are not the ones we are given, but the ones we have the courage to write for ourselves. She didn't shy away from the painful parts, but she wrote them with a grace and an empathy that left me breathless. The book was a critical success, but its true success, for me, was in its truth. It was our story, refined by art, offered to the world as a testament to resilience. Andrea's music therapy program has been adopted by the city's school system. She trains other therapists now, her methods, born from her own journey of finding her voice, helping countless children who have none. She never married, but her life is full to bursting with love, the love of her music, her students, her family. She is the free spirit she was always meant to be, her song a constant, comforting refrain in the symphony of our lives. And Paul, dear Paul, he is 18 now, and he will be the first in his immediate family to go to college. He's been accepted to study social work, his application essay a moving account of his own complex family history and his desire to help other kids navigating fractured worlds. He still calls me Grandma L. He still comes for Sunday dinner. The bridge he built has become a well-traveled road. He sees his mother regularly, their relationship quieter, more mature now. He is the living, breathing proof that it is never too late for healing to begin. But the most profound evolution of our legacy is happening in the heart of my great-granddaughter, Ellie. At 5 years old, she is a whirlwind of curiosity and fierce affection. She knows the simplified version of our story, the Gigi story, as she calls it. She knows that her daddy and aunties lived with me when they were little, and that I loved them very, very much. The harder truths are for later, but the foundation of love and security is unshakable. One afternoon, she was sitting with me on the sofa, her small body tucked against my side, looking through a photo album. She pointed to a picture of Arthur, Emily, and Andrea as children, sitting on this very same sofa, their small faces serious. "They look sad, Gigi," she observed, her little finger tracing the glass. "They were a little sad then, my love," I said softly. "But they got better." She looked up at me, her eyes, so like her father's, filled with a startling depth. "Because you loved them." "Yes, sweetheart, because I loved them." She was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. Then she said, "I love you, Gigi. So much. When I grow up, I'm going to have a big, big house, and I'm going to fill it with kids who are sad, and I'm going to love them until they're happy, just like you did." The words, so simply and sincerely spoken, stole the air from my lungs. The legacy was not just in the foundations and the books and the music. It was encoded in the DNA of this child's heart. She had understood the central tenet of our family without ever being explicitly taught, that love is an active verb, that it is a force that gathers the broken pieces and makes them whole. I held her close, my tears falling silently into her soft hair. This was the harvest, this was the point of it all. As my energy has waned, my family has instinctively drawn closer, their orbits tightening protectively around me. They don't treat me as an invalid, but as their center of gravity. Emily reads to me from the manuscripts she's editing. Andrea plays her new compositions for me first, her head cocked, watching my face for a reaction. Paul tells me about his college plans, his voice eager and hopeful. And Arthur and Lena, with Ellie between them, are here almost every day, the sound of their life a comforting presence in the house. I know my time in this beautiful, chaotic, love-filled house is drawing to a close. I feel it not as a fear, but as a natural, gentle pulling, like the tide being drawn back to the sea. I have no unfinished business, Every conversation that needed to be had has been had. Every wound that could be healed has been healed. Every truth has been told. I have begun the quiet, practical work of putting my affairs in order. It is not a morbid task, but a final act of love. I have written letters to Arthur, to Emily, to Andrea, to Paul, and one for Ellie, to be opened when she is older. They are not long, dramatic farewells. They are simple, heartfelt messages, thanking them for the honor of being their grandmother, and reminding them of the specific, brilliant light I see in each of them. I have left the bulk of my small estate to the Vance Foundation, a final investment in the future Arthur is building. One evening, as the family was gathered for dinner, a rare, profound stillness settled over us. The meal was finished, the dishes cleared. Ellie was asleep on the sofa, her head in Lena's lap. The rest of us were sipping tea, bathed in the warm, golden light of the setting Sunday. Arthur broke the silence, his voice soft. "Grandma," he said, "we've been talking, all of us, about the house." I looked at him, then at the others. Their faces were serious, but not sad. They were united. "We don't want to sell it," Emily said. "We could never sell it. This is our home," Andrea added, her voice firm. "It's the heart of everything. It's where we became a family." Paul nodded. "It's my home, too." Arthur leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "We want to keep it in the family. Forever. We want it to be a place for all of us to come back to, for holidays, for birthdays, for when we need to remember where we come from. And for Ellie, and for any other children that come along, we want it to be their North Star, just like it was for us." He looked around the table, getting silent confirmations from everyone. "We're going to create a trust. The house will belong to all of us, and then to our children. It will always be a safe place. It will always be home." I could not speak. The love that filled the room was a physical presence, warm and solid. They were not just preserving a building, they were enshrining a legacy. They were ensuring that the love that had saved them would have a permanent address, a place to live on long after I was gone. This house, with its yellow countertops and its dripping faucet, its sunlit garden, and its walls that have absorbed a lifetime of our laughter and tears, will stand as a monument not to me, but to the power of a choice. The choice to open a door on a rainy Tuesday. The choice to love when it was hard. The choice to fight, to forgive, to rebuild. In that moment, looking at the faces of my family, this magnificent, sprawling, chosen family, I felt a peace so complete it was like a final, resolving chord in our symphony. The music would play on in this house, through their lives and the lives of their children. The melody would change, new instruments would join. But the central theme, the melody of unconditional love, would remain, constant and true. My work here is done. I have loved them, and I have been loved beyond measure. I have seen the cycle broken. I have seen the legacy secured. There is no greater victory. There is no more beautiful song. There is a light that comes at the end of a long day, a golden honeyed light that seems to pour over the world, slowing time itself. It's a light that doesn't glare, but illuminates, revealing the deep, true colors of everything it touches. At 82, I have come to live in this last, good light. The frantic brightness of noon is a memory, the harsh shadows have softened and blended into a gentle, all-encompassing glow. My world has grown smaller, distilled to this house, this garden, and the faces of the people I love. But in this small world, everything is illuminated with a breathtaking clarity. I am tired. It is a deep, bone-level tiredness that comes not from a lack of sleep, but from a life fully lived. My body is a fragile vessel, and it is preparing for its final journey. The pain is a constant companion, but it is a managed one, a distant hum beneath the more immediate sensations, the warmth of the sun on my face through the kitchen window, the softness of the Afghan Emily knitted for me, the weight of Ellie's head as she dozes against my shoulder. They know. My family knows. The doctor has spoken with Arthur, and Arthur, in his steady, gentle way, has spoken with everyone. There are no whispered conversations in the hallway anymore, no poorly concealed tears. There is only a profound, collective presence. They are not mourning me yet. They are celebrating with me, savoring these final, precious days. The house has become a quiet sanctuary. The symphony has softened to a lullaby. Andrea plays her guitar, but the songs are slower now, sweeter, old folk songs and lullabies from my own childhood. Emily reads to me, not from manuscripts, but from my favorite books, poetry, mostly, words that have always felt like prayers. Paul sits with me for hours, sometimes talking about his classes, sometimes just sitting in a comfortable silence, his quiet company a balm. And Arthur is my rock, my firstborn grandson, the man who made me a great-grandmother. He holds my hand, and in his grip, I feel the strength of the future, a strength I helped build. It is a Tuesday. I know this because Lena quietly mentioned it to the hospice nurse. But the days of the week have lost their meaning. There is only now. The light in the room is that perfect, late afternoon gold. I am in my bed, propped up on pillows, the window open just a crack so I can smell the damp earth of my garden, hear the chirping of the evening birds. They are all here. Arthur is in the chair by my bed, his head bowed, his hand enveloping mine. Lena is beside him, her hand on his shoulder. Emily is on the other side, a book of Mary Oliver's poetry open but unread in her lap. Andrea sits cross-legged on the floor at the foot of the bed, her guitar resting beside her. Paul stands near the door, a solemn, loving sentinel. And Ellie, my bright, beautiful Ellie, is curled next to me, her small body warm against my side, fast asleep. We are not waiting for anything. We are simply being. The air is thick with love, a tangible, breathing thing. I look at their faces, one by one, and I imprint them on my soul. Arthur's strong, kind profile. Emily's thoughtful, gentle eyes. Andrea's fierce, loving spirit shining from her face. Paul's quiet, grateful presence. Lena's steady compassion. And Ellie, the perfect, sleeping promise of tomorrow. I have no regrets. I have no fears. The story has been told. The legacy is secure. The love I poured out for decades is now flowing back to me in this quiet room, a river returning to its source. I think of the young woman I was at 67, terrified in a courtroom, clutching a yellow envelope filled with secrets. I could never have imagined this peace. I could never have envisioned this fullness. The judge's gavel, Valerie's accusations, the years of struggle, they were all just the difficult, necessary verses in a song that ends in this profound, perfect harmony. My gaze drifts to the window. The light is deepening, turning from gold to a soft, rosy orange. I can see the silhouette of the oak tree in the garden, the one Arthur used to climb as a boy. I remember hanging a tire swing from its strongest branch. I remember pushing a little girl with tangled hair, her laughter ringing through the yard. I remember a teenage boy sitting in its shade, pouring his heart out to me about a girl who didn't love him back. That tree has witnessed it all. It will continue to stand long after I am gone, its roots deep in the soil of this home, its branches sheltering the generations to come. I feel a gentle pressure on my hand. Arthur is squeezing it. I turn my head slowly, the movement and effort, and meet his eyes. They are filled with tears, but they are not tears of grief. They are tears of pure, unadulterated love. He sees me. He truly sees me. And he is thanking me, with every fiber of his being, for the life I gave him. I try to smile, to reassure him, but I'm not sure if my muscles obey. It doesn't matter. He understands. My breathing is becoming slower, shallower. It is not a struggle. It feels like a gentle release, like a boat being untied from a dock, finally free to drift out with the tide. The sounds in the room begin to fade, the rustle of leaves, the distant hum of a car, the soft rhythm of Andrea's breathing. The world is receding, becoming softer, blurrier at the edges. But the love does not fade. It grows brighter, sharper, more focused. It is the only thing that is truly real. I see them all, not with my eyes, but with my heart. Arthur, my rock. Emily, my wordsmith. Andrea, my song. Paul, my surprise blessing. Lena, my daughter-in-love. And Ellie, my future. I have loved them. I have been loved by them. It has been the great, stunning privilege of my life. The last of the light outside the window winks out, but the room is not dark. It is filled with a different kind of light, a light that comes from within this circle of love, a light that they have created for me. I take one last, soft breath, and then I let go. There is no pain. There is no fear. There is only a vast, infinite peace, and the enduring, unbreakable echo of love. In the quiet room, Arthur felt the subtle change in her hand. The fragile, bird-like bones seemed to settle, the constant, faint tension finally leaving them. He looked at her face. It was serene, the lines of a lifetime of worry and love smoothed into an expression of perfect, final rest. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. He did not cry out, he did not shake her, he simply bowed his head, brought her hand to his lips and held it there, his shoulders trembling with the force of his silent, grateful sobs. Emily reached out and gently closed her grandmother's eyes. She then placed her hand on Arthur's back, a steady, comforting pressure. Andrea, from the floor, began to hum. It was a wordless, ancient melody, one her grandmother had hummed to her when she was a child, scared and unable to sleep. It was a lullaby, a blessing, a farewell. Paul stepped forward and placed a hand on Arthur's shoulder, completing the circle. They stayed that way for a long time as the room grew dark around them, held together by the love she had taught them, a love that death itself could not extinguish. Ellie slept on, dreaming her 5-year-old dreams, safe and loved, the future of the legacy resting, for now, in the peaceful rise and fall of her breath. The story of Eleanor Vance was over. But the story of the family she built had only just begun. The old house on Elm Street breathed differently now. The silence that had descended after Eleanor's passing was not the empty silence of absence, but a full, respectful silence, like the pause after a beautiful piece of music ends, the notes still hanging in the air. For a year, the family moved through the rooms like careful curators, preserving the feeling she had left behind. Arthur came every weekend to tend the garden. Emily sat at the kitchen table to write, feeling the ghost of her grandmother's presence in the morning light. Andrea played her guitar in the sunroom, the melodies, a conversation with the memory that lived in the walls. They had honored Eleanor's final wish. The house was held in a family trust, deeded to Arthur, Emily, and Andrea, with provisions for Paul and for any future generations. It was no longer just a house, it was a living heirloom, the physical heart of the Vance family. It was on the first anniversary of her passing that they all gathered there again, not for a somber memorial but for a celebration. Eleanor had been clear in her final instructions: no black, no tears. Have a party. Eat my lasagna recipe. Play music. Tell stories about me that will make you laugh. And so they did. The house was filled with the scent of garlic and basil, the sound of Andrea's band tuning up in the living room, and the joyful noise of a family reunited. Arthur and Lena were there, and Ellie, now 6, raced through the rooms with her cousins. Emily was there with David, and Paul, home from his first year of college, held court at the kitchen island, telling wide-eyed freshmen stories about his unique and sprawling family. In the middle of the party, Arthur clinked his glass for quiet. The room fell silent, all faces turning toward him. She wouldn't want a long speech. He began, a smile touching his lips. So I'll keep it short. We're here because of her. This house stands because of her. This family exists because of her. He looked around the room, his gaze lingering on each of them. But she also told me something, near the end. She said, "The work is yours now. The song is yours to sing. So, I have a proposal." He gestured to the trust documents laid out on the dining table. "This house is our North Star. It's our anchor. But a star is meant to guide a journey. Mom Grandma, she was our North Star. Now, it's our turn to be that for someone else. He unveiled a new plaque he'd had made, to be mounted beside the front door. It read, "The Eleanor Vance Home, a sanctuary for families in transition." "The trust has been amended," Arthur explained, his voice gaining the passionate, visionary tone he used for his foundation work. "This will always be our family home. But when we're not using it, it won't sit empty. In partnership with my foundation, it will become a short-term sanctuary for families, navigating crisis, women and children, fleeing difficult situations, families between homes, anyone who needs a safe, beautiful, and loving place to catch their breath for a few weeks. They'll be surrounded by her spirit. They'll feel the peace she created here." A profound, moved silence filled the room. It was the perfect way to honor her. Not by building a statue, but by continuing her work. By keeping the door open. Emily was the first to speak, her voice thick with emotion. "It's perfect, Arthur. She would love that her home was still a refuge." Andrea strummed a bright, major chord on her guitar. "The symphony continues," she said, her eyes shining. The project became their shared mission. They worked together, painting rooms, stocking the pantry, creating a guidebook for the families who would stay there, filled with their favorite local spots and, of course, Eleanor's lasagna recipe. The first family to stay was a young mother and her 2 sons, escaping a volatile situation. When they left 2 weeks later, the mother wrote in the guest book, "I didn't know a house could hug you. Thank you for this shelter. We felt safe here for the first time in years." When Arthur read that aloud to the family, they all knew, with absolute certainty, that they had gotten it right. 5 more years spun by. The rhythm of the house became a new, beautiful composition, periods of joyful family chaos during holidays and reunions, interspersed with stretches of quiet sanctuary for strangers who became, for a brief time, part of its story. Ellie was 11 now, on the cusp of adolescence, all long limbs and a thoughtful seriousness that reminded Arthur so much of Emily at that age. She loved the Vance home more than any other place on earth. She had her own corner of the garden where she grew sunflowers, and she took her role as the guardian of the guest book very seriously, reading every entry with a solemn sense of purpose. One summer afternoon, she was helping Arthur weed the flower beds when she looked up, her face smudged with dirt. "Dad?" she asked. "Can I ask you something about Gigi?" "Anything, sweetheart," Arthur said, sitting back on his heels. "You always say she was the strongest person you knew, but was she ever scared?" The question was so perceptive it caught him off guard. He thought of the yellow envelope, of the courtroom, of the countless nights she must have lain awake, worrying how she would feed them, clothe them, protect them. "Yes, Ellie," he said softly. "She was scared a lot. Being strong isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid, and doing the right thing anyway. It's about loving people so much that your love is bigger than your fear." Ellie considered this, her brow furrowed. So, her love was like a superhero power? Arthur laughed, a warm, full sound. "Yeah, kiddo, that's exactly what it was. Her love was her superpower." This seemed to satisfy her, and she went back to her weeding, but the conversation planted a seed in Arthur's mind. Later that week, he gathered everyone for a video call, Emily and David from their book-lined apartment, Andrea from a recording studio, Paul from his social work internship. "I've been thinking about legacy," Arthur said. "We've preserved the physical place, but we need to preserve the story. The whole story. Not just for us, but for Ellie, and for her children, and for the families who find shelter in Mom's name. They should know who she was. They should know our story." And so, they began their greatest collaborative project yet. They decided to write a book, not a biography, but a tapestry of their memories, woven together. Emily would be the lead writer, shaping the narrative with her novelist's grace. Arthur would provide the factual backbone, the dates, the legal documents, the structure. Andrea would curate a soundtrack of original music to accompany the book, songs inspired by different chapters of their lives. And Paul, with his social worker's heart, would ensure the story was told with empathy and honesty, focusing on the psychological journey, the healing. They spent months on the project, their weekly calls filled with laughter and tears as they unearthed long-buried memories. Emily would read a draft of a chapter, and Andrea would play a melody she'd composed for it, the music giving words to the emotions they struggled to express. Paul would gently challenge them, asking, "But what were we feeling here? What was Mom really carrying?" The process was as much about their own continued healing as it was about documenting the past. They saw their history from each other's perspectives, understanding the burdens each had carried. The book was titled The Yellow Envelope, a story of fear, love, and the family we choose. Emily's prose was luminous and raw. Andrea's soundtrack, available with a QR code in the book, was a hauntingly beautiful accompaniment, from the melancholic strains of The Rain-Soaked Tuesday to the triumphant, soaring notes of The Unbroken Circle. They decided to publish it independently, and all proceeds would go to the Vance Foundation and the upkeep of the Eleanor Vance home. On the day the first printed copies arrived, they all gathered at the house. Arthur held the book in his hands, its cover a simple, elegant design with a faint image of a faded yellow envelope. It felt solid, real. He opened it to the dedication page, and his breath caught. "For Eleanor Vance, our grandmother, our mother, our North Star, your love taught us that courage is just love. Holding on for one more day. And for every family, chosen or given, still finding its way home." They had done it. They had captured the echo. The book found its way into the world quietly, but its impact was profound. It was picked up by book clubs, discussed on podcasts about resilience, and found its way into the hands of grandparents raising grandchildren, of people who felt abandoned, of anyone who needed to hear that a broken past did not have to dictate the future. Letters began to arrive at the Vance Foundation, addressed to the Yellow Envelope family. They were stories of hope, of change, of families reconciled, of people who had found the courage to make a different choice because of their story. One letter, from a woman who had, like Eleanor, taken in her grandchildren, simply read, "You made me feel less alone. Thank you for giving me a name for what I am, a North Star." One afternoon, a thick envelope arrived, postmarked from a city a few hours away. It was addressed to Arthur. The return address was unfamiliar. He opened it carefully. Inside was a letter and a sheaf of legal documents. The letter was from a lawyer. "Dear Mr. Vance, I am writing on behalf of my client, who passed away last month. She followed the story of your family with great interest, and she requested that upon her death, this be sent to you. She was your mother, Valerie Vance." Arthur's hands trembled. He hadn't heard from her in years, since Paul had gently informed them of her passing from a sudden brief illness. She had died as she had lived her last years quietly and with dignity. She left no will, as she had very little. But she asked that I convey to you her final, deepest gratitude. She wrote, "Tell Arthur that the greatest gift of my life, besides my son Paul, was watching the man he became and the family he helped to lead. In your strength, I found my redemption. My story is ended, but yours goes on, and that is a beautiful thing. Enclosed you will find the deed to a small, paid-in-full life insurance policy." She named the Eleanor Vance home as the sole beneficiary. It is not a large sum, but it was everything she had. She wanted it to help you keep the door open. Arthur sat down heavily, the letter in his hand. He looked out the window of his office, toward the city where Valerie had lived and died. There were no more knots of anger or pain in his heart. There was only a quiet, sorrowful peace. The final, frayed thread of the past had been neatly tied. He used the money to create the Valerie Vance Memorial Garden in the backyard of the home. A quiet, shaded spot with a bench, where guests could sit and reflect. It was not a monument to a saint, but a quiet acknowledgement of a complicated, flawed human being who had, in the end, found a way to contribute to the light. Years turned, as they do. The children of the family grew up, and the story of the fierce grandmother and the yellow envelope became part of their family lore, a legend told at bedtime. The Eleanor Vance home continued its quiet, vital work, a beacon of safety and love, its story now enriched by the book that told its origin. And in the trust documents, a new clause was added, penned by Arthur and unanimously agreed upon by the family. It stated that the home should always bear her name, and that a copy of the yellow envelope should always remain on the bedside table in the main bedroom, so that every person who found shelter within those walls would know the power of a love that is bigger than fear. The North Star, fixed in its place, continued to guide them all, its light undimmed by time, its legacy written not in stone, but in the endlessly unfolding story of the family she built. The love remained. It was the foundation, the shelter, and the story. It was, and always would be, enough. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.